if psychology and pop culture had a baby, they'd call it Shrink Tank.
A new paper reveals more intelligent people are quicker to learn and unlearn.
90% chance that there's some weird animal out there.
Yeah. Stern's been doing this forever. And far more extreme. From Nashville and Charlotte, this is the Shrink Tank Podcast. Welcome, everybody, and Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Verhagen here in Nashville, and we have a great show for you. Our trending topic today is all the money in the world. We'll talk about that in our second segment. But first, let's meet our Charlotte panel. Dr. Emma Kate Wright is here. Happy New Year, Emma Kate.
Hi, Happy New Year, Dave.
Did you do anything fun?
This was actually the first year in some time that I stayed in for New Year's, and I just enjoyed watching The Sopranos, and because I haven't seen that, I'm like 20 years behind, but so yeah, it was really nice just to not do anything.
Really getting caught up.
I am, yes.
There you go. And Dr. Frank Gaskell's here. Frank, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
And what'd you do for your New Year's? I actually know the answer to this.
I did you.
Weird.
You kind of did.
I went to Nashville and I hung out with you and also hung out with another friend and coworker of yours,
Dr. Lauren King.
Dr. Lauren King, and checked out the Nashville scene.
Yep.
So it was very fun.
So that's what doing you means.
Right.
That's exactly what it means.
I need to lose 10 pounds of Nashville as well.
Did you eat well?
I ate, yes, and ate.
Nashville has a great food scene. It's
yeah.
Really good food here. Did your kiddos enjoy the trip?
They did. They were feeling a little under the weather, but they really enjoyed it. And when we got back, they just slept.
Yeah. And it was also like maybe minus 400 degrees here.
It was
like
minus 400.
It was like the surface of Neptune here.
It was so cold that my wife had a coat and took my coat because she was so cold, and so I didn't have a coat. And
that's
then
how cold it was.
Yeah, and so then I walked around downtown Nashville when it's like 9 degrees, freezing to death.
Yeah.
Good man.
God love you. Well, Jonathan Hedderly is here. And Jonathan, did you have a Happy New Year?
I did. Thank you, Dave. Did you?
I did. I did exactly what Emma Kate did, except without The Sopranos. We actually had about 10 people in our little apartment, and we cooked pizza, we watched TV, we played spades and other games, and just hung out, like very low key. It was so cold, I was not about to go out on New Year's Eve, so that was our gig. What'd you do?
My wife and I, we watched Black Mirror, and we were both asleep before midnight.
There you go. That's what one of the benefits for my wife of living in Central Time Zone now is that when the ball drops in Times Square, she goes, "Good night, everybody," and she goes to bed at 11. But for her,
That's great.
She's made it to 12, so
nice.
It works.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan is also our certified Asian who rounds out the panel, and each week he trolls the internet to find great stories of psychology in the news in our first segment that we call
Being Human.
So a week ago, if you did not know who Logan Paul was, I'm sure you do now. After publishing images of a visit to Japan's suicide forest that included footage of a dead body, YouTube star Logan Paul is apologizing, and critics are denouncing both the video and Logan's behavior in it. The video ended up being watched by millions before it was removed. Now, Paul, who has over 15 million YouTube subscribers, claimed that he thought the video could make a positive ripple on the internet. So, Emma Kate, as an avid YouTube viewer, do you object to Paul's decision to post this video, and what do you make of the online uproar?
Yeah, 100% disagree with the fact that he posted this. So I also am in support of the uproar because, I saw an edited clip of this YouTube post and where they had removed the graphic content, and he reportedly claims, as you said, that he's trying to raise awareness. But yet in that clip, they're laughing, they're joking around. And the reality is, if I saw a dead body, I would never have that sort of response. And, this is a 22-year-old kid. He's trying to be famous, and he just completely lacked insight onto the situation, and I thought it was really disgusting and sad.
I wonder that some of these YouTubers are living their lives through a phone camera if they're so far removed from reality that they lose the sense that this is real. Like everything's sort of like a show.
Or a video game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, it kind of has that vibe about it. I don't know this kid at all. I don't know if I've even heard of his name before this thing. And, some of it is you're a 22-year-old guy that's gotten relatively famous. I mean, if you think 15 million subscribers, that's way more than most network television shows pull in per episode in terms of viewers. So he's got a big platform. So he's a young guy. I'm not making excuses for him. I'm just saying young guy that then gets famous quickly and then sort of loses the handle. And it feels like there's kind of a lack of grounding where what happens with this YouTube celebrity phenomenon is that there's no one around, there's no industry around them to kind of shepherd them or guide them or give input or advice. They're kind of freestyling 100% of it. And so I think this is kind of an inevitable thing, not just with him, but with this whole industry.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Dave, where if he had had maybe a PR team, somebody could have caught this and said, hey, what are you doing, bud? But because of that, he is just this 22-year-old kid who's acting impulsively and kind of just going with flying by the seat of his pants and not realizing kind of the long-term repercussions of something like this.
So I didn't see the clip. I'm not going to watch the clip, but and I have heard it's been taken down anyway. But what I heard was that his claim was that he was using this for awareness. And then, like you said, later in the video, they're joking around and all that. Do you think that's a credible, from what you saw, MK, is that a credible claim that that's why he was doing it? Or do you think he kind of reverse engineered this thing and said, no, I was really trying to do a good thing here?
Well, and again, because I just saw like a tiny clip. I didn't watch, obviously, as you said, the original one was removed, but what I saw, they had taken all the graphic content out, and it was just essentially him and his friends. They were kind of laughing and being like, whoa, I can't believe that happened, and they were telling these younger girls, don't go over to that part over there, and it didn't feel authentic at all. It felt like, it's hard to describe, truly. Like, it just seemed like they were that removed from what they actually experienced, which could be a form of shock in some ways, but I don't know. Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, I don't know Logan Paul very well, but ever since this story broke, I've tried to read up on the situation and his reputation, and he really lacks any credibility in his past antics online of having any type of desire to use his celebrity status to platform serious issues. So I think that's one of the challenges that he faces is that it's hard to find that credible when there's no history of him trying to be sensitive and nuanced. And this obviously was not sensitive or nuanced whatsoever. So it does feel like somebody trying to spin something, after the fact.
Right. And it's for a guy like this, he puts something up, it doesn't go well, then he tries to spin it, and that goes even worse. And the stuff that I read that was the most strong emotionally was on Twitter. I saw several posts from people that had lost a loved one to suicide, and in fact, a few people that had even found the loved one after they'd committed suicide, and their first-person account of it, and just how this is not something, it's obvious, but not something to be taken lightly or portrayed in any kind of light way, I think really hits hard. And so hopefully those voices are going to be heard above all this stuff.
I have a question. What is that forest? Why is that so?
It's in Japan, right? It's called the Suicide Forest. And
So my significant other, he was in the Navy and lived in Japan for several years, and he knew of that forest, has never been there, but apparently it's like the equivalent of the Golden Gate Bridge for some people who are thinking about hurting themselves.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a place where you can go and not be seen. and it's kind of hidden enough where if someone wanted to hang themselves, they could do that without a likelihood of being stopped. And so I think it's just developed that reputation.
So people are hanging themselves.
Yeah, that's how they're killing themselves.
I didn't know if there was like a cliff or something. Okay, got it. Mm-hmm. That's awful.
Yep. So this is actually, I mean, obviously for this kid Logan Paul, this is a wake up call, but also I think it's a broader wake up call for that, I'll call it that industry, which is that with a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility, as Spider-Man would say. You know, it's you have a big platform. You've got 15 million subscribers. You've got over that in terms of number of eyes on your videos potentially, and so it doesn't matter if you're 16 or 22. If you've developed that platform, you have a responsibility to handle that well. And he didn't do that. So not a cool move. Well, let's shift to our second segment and talk a little bit about a movie that came out right at the end of the year. And some people are just now seeing it, called All the Money in the World. And it's about the kidnapping of J. Paul Getty's grandson, Paul. And at the time, J. Paul Getty was the richest man in the world. And there's a lot to talk about with this movie. I want to talk a little bit about J. Paul Getty and the psychology of rich people. I want to talk about kidnapping psychology. And I also want to talk about some special circumstances that were involved in making this movie that have some psychological elements to it also. But let me ask you before we dive into it, has anybody here known anyone personally that has been kidnapped?
I got kidnapped for a choir retreat.
That's
it.
That must have been really hard on you.
It's really traumatic.
I kidnapped you, Dave, when you were teaching.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I was actually teaching at UNC Chapel Hill. I was teaching developmental psychology, and Frank and about, I'm going to say 8 other guys came into the classroom, kicked the door open, and tied me up and carried me out of the classroom.
While you were lecturing?
Yep.
Yeah, while I was lecturing.
It was great. We carried him all the way down outside. We had masks and stuff and scarves.
Yeah, you had masks and then here's the thing. Then they carried me down 3 flights of stairs. They dropped me in the courtyard basically, and then like stood around me and chanted. Then after that was done, I guess they didn't figure out like what the end game was.
We didn't know how to end it.
Right. Then they followed me back into the classroom, and my entire class was just sitting there. No one had moved, right? We'd been out of the classroom for like 10 minutes. No one moved. We come back up. They're all sitting there, and all these guys come sit in the classroom and just interrupt the classroom with stupid questions the whole time. Like as I'm lecturing, they raise their hand and they ask like a stupid question about what I just said. So,
right.
Yeah, and it had no bigger point than that. By the way, Jonathan, have you ever known anybody to be kidnapped for real?
I have not known anybody. I briefly did some family and couples counseling with somebody that had been abducted.
Wow. Well, I have actually, as I was thinking about this episode, I was realizing I have known someone that was kidnapped for real. And it was my next door neighbor's sister. My next door neighbor's sister was kidnapped at gunpoint.
Whoa.
Put into a car, driven around to different ATMs, and forced to withdraw money, and at gunpoint, basically. And this, I'm going to make a long story short, but my next door neighbor called the police. He felt like they were dragging their heels, so he got a gun, his own gun, and drove around until he intercepted the guy, and at a stoplight, pulled up behind the guy, ran, grabbed the guy out of the car, and held him in the middle of the street on Providence Road in Charlotte. No, it wasn't on Providence Road. It was, anyway. And held him there until the police came.
Wow.
Kid you not.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Like held the guy with the gun pointing in the guy's face, laying in the middle of the street with cars all around them until the police came.
That freaks me out.
Oh, wow.
It was just like Liam Neeson.
Yeah.
On a more serious note, there was a girl in my sorority. I know that was serious too, but
On a more serious note.
No, I'm sorry.
That
You're
one
right.
doesn't
That was
count.
Gunpoint kidnapping. A little more serious.
Is
I'm sorry.
unimportant.
There was a girl in my sorority who was on the trip with Natalie Holloway to Aruba when she got abducted.
How about that? That's great, Emma Kate.
All right. Sorry.
That is more serious.
Yeah.
Every time we talk today, everyone interrupts saying, on a more serious note.
Right. Yes. On a more serious, because gun abduct. You know. Okay. Alrighty.
Did she
Great.
know? I am curious about this. Did she know Natalie Holloway?
She did. Yeah. They went.
Oh, wow.
They were in class together.
And does she have any theory about it?
I never. I mean, I didn't want to pry, so I never actually spoke to her about it. But
Lauren
right.
King knew her.
Lauren King knew Natalie Holloway?
Yeah.
You're kidding.
what?
How did she know her?
Birmingham.
No way. All right. I'm gonna pick her brain about that.
Yeah.
All right. So just to kind of set this up, this movie is about a true story, and it makes a point of saying it's based on true events, which means they also took a lot of liberties with aspects of the story. But the true part of the story is that J. Paul Getty was the richest man in the world, the richest man in history up to that point, an oil baron, basically, oil magnate. And he, his grandson, who at the time was 16 years old and kind of living by himself in this bohemian lifestyle in Rome, was abducted by these kind of low-grade street thugs, like a street gang. And they thought, this is an easy bit of money here. We're just going to kidnap the dude, call his family. They've got tons of money. We're going to ask for $14 million. They're going to pay it. Well, it gets back to J. Paul Getty, and J. Paul Getty basically says, I'm not going to pay it, flat out, just not. And then this escalates and escalates. The small gang sells the kid to the mafia, and the mafia then is playing hardball. And they basically, they couldn't make money off this kidnapping, so they sold him to the mafia essentially. And then the mafia is like, all right, so they to prove that they were serious, they cut off his ear. They cut off the kid's ear.
Spoiler.
And mailed it and a picture of the kid to into the police station so that there was proof of it. And J. Paul Getty still would not pay. And so where the movie takes some liberties is they kind of try and make it be like there's this Mark Wahlberg character who's ex-CIA who's going to be like, who's going to save the day and all that stuff.
Well, that was real.
There are aspects of that were real.
Yeah, the CIA operative.
Right. There was CIA operative, but really it's the mom's story. The mom is
Yeah.
the one who is kind of the hero of the story, and that gets a little bit lost in the movie. The movie's not bad, but it gets a little bit lost in the movie. So I want to ask first about the psychology of rich people. And when I watched it, I realized part of the draw for Ridley Scott making this movie is that it is a Trumpian parable, right? Here's a guy who has all the money in the world, and it's never enough. It's never enough. And he's lacking kind of empathy for even people that are loved by him. And when I left the movie, we were talking about it in the group that I went with, and one of the things I said is, I'm not just talking about people who are well off, but rich people. They do think differently than other people. Would you agree with that? I mean, that there's a different way of, and I'm not necessarily being entirely critical here, but there is a different way of thinking.
100%. So 100%. There's I will make this vague, but I knew an individual who was just disturbingly wealthy, and he one of his business partners bought his dream car, and then this other person I know went out and bought the most expensive car you could possibly buy here in Charlotte and parked it next to him.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking one person buys a $150,000 car, he went out and bought a $400,000 car.
Right. So somebody asked me about Trump over the break, and I said, to be honest, and I don't want to say all roads point back to Trump, but this year they kind of have in a lot of ways. I said there's just really one way to understand this. It's not strategic. It's not there's some bigger plan. It's that he's a narcissistic guy that must win. In his mind, it's all about I win and you lose. It's someone wins and someone loses, and I'm going to win. And that's how J. Paul Getty is. You know, that's how he's portrayed in this, is like I am a reincarnated emperor, basically, and I'm going to win. Do you think that mindset is the result of getting that rich and having to protect yourself, or do you think it is what causes someone, or both? What's your guess?
Well, my first response would be it depends how the person accumulated their wealth. So when you think about Trump or Getty, if somebody, you know, is a narcissist, or they really think the rules don't apply to them, then they're going to operate with that mindset in terms of accumulating their wealth. So it would make sense that they would then think that other people think that way as well. So, you know, what's the angle? You know, what is your true motive, to where there's an element of paranoia, especially, you know, maybe this is just the cynic in me, but I feel like people that are extremely wealthy or extremely powerful, they have this moral gray area or a morally deplorable side of them that has to be executed in order to gain that.
I'm kind of with you in terms of like seeing the wealth develop within a family, where it's the generational difference, where like if, for example, your father or mother were to, you know, acquire all this wealth through something that they earned and developed, you know, their kids would see that, but then potentially the grandkids or great grandkids would lose that perspective, and then we kind of enter into this entitlement and we lose some empathy towards people and whatnot.
There's an article out in Vanity Fair about Silicon Valley and these parties that are going on out there that are just sex parties fueled by drugs. They start on a Friday, they can go on through a Sunday, and they're at all these like high venture capital and high tech founders in their houses, and they literally are having these, in some cases orgies, but just wide open sexual relationships with MDMA, all this other stuff. And it's because they say, well, we're free thinkers. We're expanding the paradigm. We're creating a new way of thinking. And it's they don't think like everybody else. They really don't.
I kind of wonder, though, if part of it has to do with when you get to a certain level of socioeconomic status, you can hire people to help you. And so then, therefore, those people are serving you. And so then how you view interactions with others changes.
Well, the funny thing about that article, I really want you guys to read it.
Okay. Thanks, Frank.
There's this a tech executive who is anonymous, but he said, look, you know, most of these guys didn't get a date until they got rich. So while they were in high school, they were playing games and getting picked on. And now they've got all this wealth and they're just using it to have sex.
I 100% see that. And what's cool about this movie is that it does give some nuance to this very rich man. It's not just he's not just portrayed as a villain. He is portrayed as a nuanced person. Ultimately, you don't leave the movie a big fan of his, but he in the movie says, my father said I would never amount to anything, and now I make him look like a pauper. And then later, or at another point in the movie, they have a scene from the past where the grandson, when he was probably 9 or 10, is sitting at the table opening letters that have been mailed to J. Paul Getty, asking for money. And he dictates to the grandson the response, which is basically, if I gave you money, I'd have to give everyone money that asked for it, and I'd be in the exact same shape you're in right now. And then in another scene, he says, if I pay this for Paul, then I have 14 grandchildren, and I will have to pay 14 ransoms. And so it kind of it adds a little layer of complexity of like, there are experiences that someone who is rich faces that we don't face also, of being hit up for money constantly, of greater risks, of family dynamics that are different. So I think it did a nice job with that.
Yeah, I think that I could easily see how excessive wealth could turn somebody into a recluse or be a very lonely existence when you have to second guess people's motives, even for something as simple as friendship.
Yeah.
You know, if your name or your status is well known, how difficult it can feel to be exploited and used, and you would really become paranoid, and it would be very off-putting to not be able to trust people that they didn't have a different motive.
I know somebody, so there are certain situations where it's like what you're saying, it's a different planet that they live on. And I was watching a house get built, and they installed a safe room in this house. And I just thought, wow, that's really narcissistic. But then I thought, oh, well, they could get kidnapped because they are very, very high profile. And so is that a bad thing? And what does that say about humanity? But it's weird.
Yeah, and we have some rich friends that have been very, very generous. They take us on vacation almost every year. They're very generous to people. They've helped support some folks that I know get through college. They're just incredibly generous, but it is different. I mean, when they travel, sometimes they don't. They have to be discreet about where they go, or that they're there, or that they're all there together. They have to be discreet about conversations regarding money. There are differences. They can't. I mean, there's just no way they can live the way that normal folks can. So let me ask you one other thing about this. The themes in this movie in particular. This kid was kidnapped. He was in captivity for about 5 months. He had his ear cut off, and then he was eventually released when they came up with some money. It was far less than they originally were asking for. Then what we know is that this kid really never recovered. He ended up getting married when he was 18. Soon divorced, had a child. He ended up hanging around the Andy Warhol scene in New York, got heavily involved in drugs, and ended up, I think when he was probably 21, stroking out. And he stroked out, lost the ability to do almost everything. And his mother cared for him at that point until he died when he was 50 or so. And obviously the through line to that traces back to this trauma. What do you think are the unique issues about kidnapping that might be uniquely traumatizing, and how that would affect somebody?
I'd be paranoid, always looking over my shoulder.
He'd be more paranoid.
More paranoid,
Yeah.
right?
Paranoidier.
Why me? What did I do to cause this?
Yeah, the illusion that the world is safe is completely gone at that point.
Yeah, and that's what you need to be able to operate in this world, is to be able to have some type of cognitive framework to where even if something is possible, that's an extremely low probability that it would happen to you. But then when one of the most extreme events happens to you, you can no longer go into that kind of blind spot where you can organize safety and trust or low probability, because, I mean, the most extreme example has befallen you.
Yeah.
That's it. Before we step away from the movie, there's one aspect, not of the theme of the movie or themes of the movie, but how the movie was made. The movie was shot with Kevin Spacey as J. Paul Getty, as the patriarch. And then when all the stuff came out about Kevin Spacey, he was excised from the movie by Ridley Scott. They quickly called Christopher Plummer, who incidentally was Ridley Scott's first choice, and they called the cast back together, and over just a few weeks, they reshot every scene on the same locations again. And I will be honest, you really cannot tell. I mean, and Christopher Plummer is the best part of the whole movie. He is fantastic in the movie.
Why didn't he pick him first if it was his first choice?
It was studio pressure. Kevin Spacey's more of a box office draw, and Christopher Plummer is less so at this point in their career, or not now. But yeah, I mean that's the kind of thing. There's a lot of negotiation with casting, and the studios want some insurance with a big name. But once this was like, well, if we keep him in here, we've sunk the movie. Then Ridley Scott got his way. They called Christopher Plummer, and the guy shows up I think with less than a week notice and nails it. I mean, the movies we're seeing for his performance for sure. But what do you think about that? Just in terms of that move, obviously it paid off, but it feels to me like there's two motives going on there. One is we got to save our movie, but the other is Ridley Scott's been really clear about I'm just not going to stand for allowing us to kind of put out a movie and endorse this guy at this point. What do you think about that?
Makes me like him even more. I love his films, but that's a pretty stand-up move.
Yeah, I think that was obviously a big risk to try and fix that issue so quickly, and yet you're saying they pulled it off very well. So I think that speaks highly to kind of what his beliefs are.
Yeah, I think there's two motives. One is admirable. The other is more financial or business oriented. And I don't think you can separate that both were at hand. But, you champion the more admirable, reason behind it, and then hopefully move forward and really celebrate people in Hollywood that are showing moral backbone and hopefully are going to make some positive changes in that community.
Yeah. I don't necessarily think it's a great movie. I give it probably a B, maybe a B plus, but in that kind of range. But the Christopher Plummer performance is solid, man. It's really good. All right, let's wrap this up with our final segment that we call Doctor's Orders. And this is where we're recommending things that we're personally enjoying in pop culture. Emma Kate, you have anything to recommend?
So it's not really a pop culture thing per se, but I know a very trendy gift this year for the holidays was essential oil diffusers. And we actually have one here in the shrink tank. And it's extremely enjoyable to have fresh lavender or spearmint.
Oh my God.
And I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's really relaxing. So I would highly recommend that. They're very affordable at this point. You can get them from $15 to $30. And I would recommend getting an essential oil diffuser.
There you go.
There you go. Frank.
I want to recommend a pop culture toy that I got for Christmas, and it is a nearly life-size BB-8. And it is...
Again, talking about how rich people think differently than the rest of us.
Oh, my God. Jeez, there it is. I thought I was going to escape.
I'm surprised Hedderly didn't go there that whole segment, by the way.
Well, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
But anyway, this BB-8 is amazing. And it's just like from the movie. It talks. It's got all the sounds. You can talk to it. And if you put the controller on your belt, it follows you wherever you go. It's like a pet.
It's your robot pet.
Droid pet. They're not robots.
They're on some crickets.
That's true.
On that
Yep.
there.
Your expensive droid pet.
It was a gift.
It was, because rich people know rich people.
Oh, God.
I want to recommend a Netflix original movie. It's called Mudbound. It's basically a story of two men that come home after World War II to work on a farm in rural Mississippi. One of them comes from a black family that works the land. The other comes from the family that owns the land and is white. And it is really, I think, an epic and almost melodramatic, but in a good way, film. And one of the surprising performances out of it is from Mary J. Blige, who plays the black soldier's mother. And I just would highly recommend it. It's called Mudbound. I'm
going to tell you this, though. I have not seen a movie that upset my wife more than that movie in probably 10 years.
At the end?
Oh, my goodness. This is not a movie for the faint of heart, by the way. I will say that. You can feel it tightening the whole movie. There's there's a kind of a noose feel to the movie, and boy, at the end, it is like a kick in the head. So it's not the feel-good movie of the year. Let's say that.
Nope.
But it is a good movie. I am going to recommend the feel-good movie of the year, though, by contrast, and that is a movie that has gotten very middling reviews. It probably is pulling in the 50s on Rotten Tomatoes, but I thought it was really good. It's The Greatest Showman. It's about P.T. Barnum. It is a musical. It is an unapologetic musical. It is uncool, but it is very good. And the soundtrack, I believe, was written by the guys who wrote the La La Land songs. It's got Hugh Jackman, Zac Efron, Michelle Williams, Zendaya. The soundtrack's killer. It's a good movie. I would recommend it. It's a good family movie if you're looking for something for your kids to see. So that's my recommendation, and that's it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. You can check us out on shrinktank.com for great articles and videos, and you can also follow us on Twitter at @shrink_tank and like us on Facebook. Our producer and music composer is Sean Beck. For Emma Kate Wright, Jonathan Hedderly, and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville. Tell all your friends about us and make this a great year.
Shrinktank.com